Ivy Jensen wiped her hands on her faded apron as she clocked out of the cafeteria. Her small, cramped apartment awaited her, but tonight, she had something else on her mind. For months, she had set aside every spare cent from her modest paycheck, even skipping lunches and second helpings, saving up for an experience far beyond her usual reach, a tasting menu at Le Chateau, the acclaimed Michelin-starred restaurant she passed every morning on her bus route. Wearing an old blue dress that had softened with age and a pair of sensible shoes, Ivy clutched a plain foldable shopping bag, her only companion for the evening. Her purse was a beaten leather wallet, worn at the edges, no designer labels here. She rehearsed the phrase in her mind, "I have a reservation for the tasting menu." The words felt foreign on her tongue, and she worried she might mumble or mispronounce the fancy name as tasting mini menu. As she stepped through the grand doors of Le Chateau, her breath caught. Crystal chandeliers hung like starlight above immaculate marble floors that gleamed beneath her modest shoes. The scent of fresh herbs, truffles, and slow-roasted meats filled the spacious room. Waiters in tailcoats moved gracefully between polished tables draped in white linen, polished glasses caught the glint of gold-rimmed plates. Ivy's heart pounded with awe and nervous excitement. Approaching the hostess stand with tentative steps, Ivy cleared her throat and said, I have a reservation for the tasting mini-menu." The maitre d', a tall, sharply dressed man with a thin smile, arched an eyebrow and sneered loudly enough for nearby diners to hear. "This isn't a place for cafeteria cooks who can't pronounce menu, miss. Perhaps you're lost." His voice dripped with scorn. Ivy's ears burned as patrons glanced her way. Her cheeks flushed hot. She felt smaller than ever, suddenly invisible and unwelcome in a world that celebrated everything she was not. Ivy's heart sank as the maitre d's words echoed in the opulent dining room. Whispers rustled like a breeze through the crystal chandeliers, and a few nearby diners exchanged amused glances. One woman, pearls glinting around her slender neck, smiled thinly, while a man in a tailored suit smirked openly. At a corner table, a group of younger patrons chuckled discreetly, their eyes darting toward Ivy like she were a peculiar spectacle. Elsewhere, some ignored the scene, pretending to peruse their menus but still casting occasional uneasy looks. The warmth Ivy had briefly felt in anticipation of the night was snuffed out by the cold ocean of judgment surrounding her. The maitre d' didn't offer to help her find the correct place or politely clarify the process. Instead, he stepped back with an air of triumph. Ivy's legs felt weak. She gripped her plastic shopping bag tighter, nails digging into the thin handles. I'm sorry," she mumbled softly, voice trembling, wanting nothing more than to retreat into a corner. Her wide eyes darted around as she searched for an escape route. A young waiter nearby caught sight of the situation and quietly approached. "Ma'am, could I help you?" he asked gently, his tone apologetic. Ivy nodded, willing to accept any small kindness. The waiter offered an arm. She hesitated but then accepted, letting him guide her toward the exit. The maitre d's dismissive glance followed her back, his expression still smug. Outside, cold night air hit Ivy's face, and she swallowed hard, eyes brimming with tears she struggled to hold back. As she walked a few paces away, she found an empty concrete bench beneath a yellow street lamp. Her hands shook as she sat down, clutching the bag where her few possessions rested. The lamp cast a halo over her, but instead of light, the weight of humiliation pressed down on her like a stone. Around her, the city buzzed, distant car horns, muffled footsteps, the occasional bark of a dog, but inside, Ivy felt utterly silent, cut off from the world. She exhaled hard and let her head fall back against the wall, eyes closing as memories flooded in. She saw herself, years earlier, standing behind the lunch counter of the small downtown cafeteria where she'd worked ever since she was 16. The place was modest, with scratched tables and a broken cash register, but she loved what she did. Her hands moved expertly, chopping vegetables, stirring simmering pots, plating simple meals with care. Often, she skipped her own lunch to make sure the customers left satisfied. Tips were scant but precious, tucked away each day, penny by penny, until a modest nest egg formed. Ivy's thoughts drifted to the times she borrowed a colleague's bicycle to avoid bus fare or chose water over coffee to stretch the budget. She thought of her mother, who'd raised her alone, working long hours as a janitor, always encouraging Ivy to find joy in small things: a sunny window, a fresh loaf of bread, a shared laugh. Her mind lingered on the scraped knees, the late-night stitches, the endless dishes washed after closing. The ticket to Le Chateau had been a dream in the making. The local doctor had advised Ivy to try more nourishing, carefully prepared food to aid her recent recovery from surgery. It wasn't just about taste, it was a hope for wellness, a celebration she'd promised herself. She remembered passing that elegant building every morning, marveling at the velvet curtains, the golden doorknobs, the artwork hanging in silent grace. One day, she had whispered to herself countless times. But tonight, the dream cracked, replaced by that biting sneer and jeering audience. She swallowed the lump in her throat, breath catching as she pushed back the tears. How quickly a moment of hope could unravel. Her fingers traced the edges of the plastic bag, thinking how she had imagined it filled with memories and joy, but now it seemed heavier than ever. Her heart ached, not just from humiliation, but because this experience had meant so much more than a fancy meal. It was a validation of her efforts, a promise that hard work could buy a taste of beauty. The promise was broken. Yet within the pain was a quiet, growing ember. Ivy took a slow breath, steadying herself against the flood of emotion. She was no stranger to hardship or rejection. She had endured dinners served cold, uneven floors to mop, and dismissive glances for years. But beneath those moments was something stronger, a resilient spirit that refused to extinguish completely. Summoning her courage, she wiped her eyes with the back of her trembling hand and stood. The night was dark, but a small flicker of resolve burned within her. As she walked away from the illuminated palace of dining perfection, the world around her came back into focus: the smells of rain on pavement, the murmur of neighbors late for evening walks, the glow of neon signs from humble shops. This was her community, her real life, the place where people didn't judge by labels or fancy appearances. Though Ivy felt diminished in that moment, deep down she knew she wouldn't let one cruel night steal her dignity entirely. She would carry the embarrassment, yes, but also the memory of every sacrifice, every small victory that had led her here. They were the threads of a story no sneer could unpick. And so, under the flickering street lamp, Ivy Jensen sat silently, letting her heart grieve for the dream that had slipped away. But even in the shadows of shattered hope, there was a spark, a promise that she was more than the harsh words of a stranger, and her story wasn't finished yet. After a long while sitting under the dim glow of the street lamp, Ivy finally stood, her knees stiff and her hands still clutching the foldable bag she always carried. The first tears had dried, but the ache lingered like a dull throb beneath her ribs. She pulled her worn coat tightly around her, the night air crisp but not cold enough to numb the sting of the evening's humiliation. She shuffled away from the empty bench, head down, footsteps slow and hesitant as she retraced her path past the gleaming entrance of Le Chateau. As she passed the side entrance, a narrow door tucked between stone columns, something caught her eye. The metal padlock securing the heavy fire exit door was old, rusted at the edges, its locking mechanism crooked and precarious. A faint creak came from the door as a damp breeze whispered through the cracks, bringing with it a faint smell of grease and something unidentifiable, something sharp and stale. Ivy paused, curiosity mingling with unease. She squinted into the semi-darkness beyond the door, her eyes adjusting just enough to catch muffled voices. Drawing closer, she overheard two staff members speaking low behind the door. "Honestly," whispered one, his voice rough and tired, "we're not even trained for emergencies. They never passed us on any safety stuff." The other laughed quietly. "Management doesn't care. As long as the big shots don't find out, we keep sweeping problems under the rug. It's all show." Ivy's chest tightened with every word. Here she was, treated like an outsider for trying to enjoy a meal. But the real shock was the knowledge that the glittering facade concealed real dangers for the people working behind the scenes. The very exit meant for quick escape in case of fire was sealed shut and unsafe. And the staff, they were left vulnerable without proper training or care, hidden beneath layers of luxury and hauteur. She glanced back at the main entrance, the polished marble gleaming just a few steps away, oblivious to the risks hidden behind its elegant walls. Ivy took a deep breath, steadying herself. Slowly, she pulled her phone from her pocket. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she managed to unlock it and tap the camera app. With cautious movements, she took pictures of the rusted padlock and the cracked door frame. Then, she discreetly snapped a photo of a small stack of chemical containers overflowing from a trash can labeled "organic scraps" nearby, a careless disregard she hadn't noticed before. Her mind raced. She thought about the chef who had mocked her earlier, the maitre d', who showed no empathy, and the oblivious diners who laughed from their safe perches. What would happen if a fire broke out or another emergency struck in the back of the house? Would these workers be able to escape? Or would Ivy's worst fears be multiplied many times over? Her thoughts swirled, but the answer was clear. She couldn't just walk away, not after witnessing this. This was important. Paying close attention, she listened a little more. One staff member muttered, "We've been told to keep quiet or risk losing our jobs. Last month, a dishwasher sprained his ankle and had to work a full week with a cast because management wouldn't cover the medical." Ivy's jaw tightened. The same place that shamed her for her simple appearance was willing to jeopardize the safety and well-being of those who kept the kitchen running. When the voices faded, she slipped her phone back into her pocket, heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. She wasn't sure whom to tell, but her thoughts went first to a journalist she followed on social media, Caroline Bailey, a respected local food and safety reporter with a large online following who had a reputation for digging into cutthroat kitchens and restaurant abuses. Back on the street, Ivy typed out a quick, careful email on her phone, attaching the photos and a brief note. "Dear Ms. Bailey, I work as a cook in a local cafeteria, and tonight I visited Le Chateau to try their tasting menu. Unfortunately, I was humiliated by a staff member and asked to leave. While leaving, I noticed some serious safety concerns in the kitchen area, including a blocked emergency exit and untrained staff. I've attached photos for your consideration. I hope this information can help protect workers and customers alike. Thank you. Ivy Jensen." She hit send before doubt could creep in, her finger hovering an instant over the button before courage pushed it down. The reply came quicker than she expected, a short message thanking her for the tip and assuring her the matter would be looked into. That response made her heart lift just a tiny bit, a ripple of hope shimmering through the fatigue. As the night deepened, Ivy walked the familiar streets on her way home, her shoulders a little straighter, her steps less hesitant. The bitter taste of rejection still lingered, but beneath it was a new purpose, born from a quiet refusal to be erased or ignored. She realized that the night had revealed more than just her place among the fancy diners. It had uncovered the stark contrast between appearance and reality, between those who wielded power and those who toiled in shadows. In the early morning hours, finding herself by a small park bench bathed in moonlight, Ivy sat again, this time not consumed by sorrow but planning small ripples that could lead to change. She wasn't a critic or a celebrity, but she was a voice, one that deserved to be heard. And perhaps, just perhaps, this unexpected night could turn into something more than a moment's disappointment. It could be the start of something better. The exposé dropped early the next morning, sweeping through the city like wildfire. Caroline Bailey's article, titled "Behind Le Chateau's Glitter, A Taste of Neglect and Humiliation," was shared across social media, websites, and local news outlets within hours. The piece detailed Ivy Jensen's harrowing experience at the restaurant, her public humiliation by a condescending staff member, and the dangerous safety violations she had uncovered, complete with photos that painted a stark picture beneath Le Chateau's polished facade. Comments flooded the post within minutes. Some voices were harsh, speaking of elitism that had no place in modern hospitality. Others recounted similar humiliations, stories of waitstaff, cooks, and cleaners belittled for their backgrounds or appearance at upscale venues. "I work as a dishwasher and got laughed at by a sommelier once for my accent," one commenter shared. Another wrote, "I spent years trimming courgettes only to be told I was unworthy of the executive chef's kitchen." Many rallied behind Ivy, expressing admiration for her bravery in speaking up. Meanwhile, some defenders of Le Chateau tried to spin the story, suggesting Ivy might have misunderstood the environment or overreacted to a routine misunderstanding. But their arguments fell flat as others pointed out the pattern of mistreatment in fine dining's elite circles. Sensing a public relations crisis, Le Chateau's management released a terse statement: "We take all guest and staff concerns seriously." An internal review is underway to address recent allegations. This was accompanied by promises to maintain the highest standards of quality and safety. The message felt hollow to many, especially to those who had followed the story closely. Within 2 days, the local health department arrived at Le Chateau, spurred by Caroline's investigative work and the mounting public concern. Inspectors combed through the kitchens and storage rooms, checking safety protocols and employee certifications. Their report, leaked to local news shortly after, confirmed multiple violations: improperly secured emergency exits, lack of formal safety training among kitchen staff, and standards of cleanliness falling below required levels. The most damaging revelation, however, came from anonymous staff, who described a toxic workplace culture where fear of losing their jobs silenced complaints. They painted a picture of management dismissing concerns as frivolous and focusing more on appearances than on the well-being of employees. Within the company, changes rippled swiftly. The maitre d', who had shamelessly mocked Ivy, was immediately suspended while the investigation continued. Company insiders noted that leaked footage on social media floated around showing her laughing at Ivy's expense just moments before the confrontation, fueling public backlash. The head chef, a celebrated but stern figure, publicly condemned the behavior, insisting such attitudes were unacceptable. Amid the growing scandal, Ivy found herself at the center of an unexpected movement. Inquiries, messages, and letters poured in from people inspired by her courage. A group of culinary workers reached out privately, sharing their own stories and expressing gratitude that someone had finally broken the silence. Local community centers and worker advocacy groups invited Ivy to speak, hoping to amplify her voice and empower others. The story didn't just touch the city, it sparked conversations about dignity, respect, and fairness in places that had long been exclusive and judgmental. Social media hashtags like #DignityForAll and #KitchenCourage trended, propelled by ordinary workers amplifying each other's struggles and successes. Ivy's simple act of reporting safety violations and standing up against humiliation had set off a chain reaction. It pushed a world often shrouded in glitter and perfection into the harsh light of reality. And while Ivy herself remained modest, she was quietly proud to have started something larger than herself. At times, the attention was overwhelming and unexpected. Calls from journalists, invites to panel discussions, and offers of support from strangers weighed on her gentle spirit. Yet Ivy remained grounded, finding strength in the kindness of friends from her community, Co-workers who hugged her and told her they were proud, reminding her where she came from and why she mattered. She often thought back to that night outside Le Chateau, the sting of humiliation, and the breathless moments that had followed as she chose to speak out rather than disappear into silence. It wasn't the glamorous tasting menu she dreamed of, but it had yielded something more enduring, a sense of justice and the chance to make the world a little more fair. She could feel the tides turning, shifts in attitudes among patrons and staff alike, easing the sharp edge of exclusion the fine dining world had long wielded. Others, too, felt braver now, to walk in their own skin unapologetically, to demand respect, to know their voices counted. As the scandal at Le Chateau unfolded publicly with increasing momentum, Ivy trusted that her ordeal wouldn't fade into a forgotten footnote. Instead, it became a rallying point, a marker that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes, a simple cook could change a world cloaked in judgment and silence. The story, though painful at first, carved out space for kindness, fairness, and dignity in a place that once offered only cold glances and sneers. And for Ivy Jensen, that was a victory far sweeter than any tasting menu could ever be. Weeks had passed since Ivy Jensen's experience at Le Chateau became a topic of public conversation. Life had begun to settle back into its quiet rhythm for her, but something had changed deep within. She still moved through her days dressed simply, her faded blue dress, sensible shoes, and ever-present foldable shopping bag, but her walk carried a newfound steadiness, a quiet dignity that neither a hostile maitre d' nor a gleaming marble floor could strip away. Back in the modest kitchen of the downtown cafeteria where she worked as a cook, Ivy prepared lunches with the usual care. The clatter of pots and pans, the scent of simmering sauces and freshly baked bread filled the air, familiar companions that gave comfort and meaning to her days. Her co-workers, a warm group of hard-working souls, looked at her with respect and sometimes admiration. When she laughed or offered a kind word, it resonated with something harder earned than before. One afternoon, as the lunch rush dwindled and the last orders were served, Ivy's phone buzzed quietly on the countertop. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from the city's health department, an official letter of thanks acknowledging her courage and generosity in reporting the safety concerns at Le Chateau. The message spoke of how her actions had helped prompt changes that would protect both workers and customers, ensuring safer environments in local restaurants. Ivy read it twice, smiling softly, a warmth spreading through her chest that no high-end dining experience had ever given her. Not long after, another message popped up, a direct message from Caroline Bailey, the investigative journalist who had originally brought Ivy's story to light. Caroline wanted to set up an interview to discuss how Ivy's experience had inspired conversations about respect and dignity in the culinary world. Ivy hesitated for a moment. The thought of being in the spotlight was daunting, but something inside nudged her forward. She replied with a simple, "Yes, I'd like that." The interview went smoothly. Ivy spoke plainly about her work, her dreams, and the sting of humiliation. She didn't dwell on anger or bitterness but emphasized the importance of kindness and fairness, values that transcended class or profession. The piece resonated deeply around the community, drawing more attention to the need for change in often hidden parts of restaurant culture. Meanwhile, Le Chateau's management reached out with a formal apology letter addressed to Ivy. They expressed regret for the incident, promised to improve staff training on customer respect, and informed her of the safety renovations implemented after the investigations. Ivy read the letter carefully. The apology was polite but felt carefully crafted, more business than heart. She sat with it for a moment before deciding to acknowledge it quietly, replying with a gratitude that was genuine but reserved. There was no rush to forgive or forget. Some wounds took time to heal. One afternoon, when her shift ended, Ivy took her usual route home, past the gleaming doors of Le Chateau. The restaurant looked different now. A freshly painted sign hung by the entrance, announcing updated policies on employee training, safety protocols, and a commitment to inclusivity. Its polished surface reflected the afternoon sun but also mirrored the quieter, firmer woman standing nearby. Ivy allowed herself a small smile. The tension in her chest loosened as she walked on, the sound of her footsteps mingling with the hum of the city. She thought about the journey, from a timid woman in an old dress, carrying a simple bag, to someone who had sparked a wave of change. Later that evening, gathered in the warm, cluttered kitchen of the cafeteria with close co-workers, Ivy lifted a chipped mug of tea, the aroma of chamomile calming and familiar. Laughter bubbled around the table amid stories and shared dreams. Ivy's smile was calm but bright, her eyes reflecting a quiet strength that had grown from adversity and resilience. As she listened to her friends, Ivy felt something that no fine dining experience had ever offered: belonging. The road had been rough, studded with unfairness and pain, but she had faced it with courage. She hadn't needed status or opulence. All she had required was the bravery to stand up, to speak out, and to remain true to herself. And in that moment, bathed in the soft glow of friendship and simple pleasures, Ivy Jensen knew she had won something far richer than any tasting menu or glistening dish. She had found her dignity.